So welcome everyone to the November 2024 edition of the Mid-Career Lab monthly Q&A call. This month, very excited to have my good friend Justin Smith on our call, a very considerate, mindful financial industry professional, financial planner with some really pertinent things to say to this audience. So I'm glad he's here. But first, we're going to do our customary housekeeping. We just before the recording, Nancy Shaw was sharing about how she used her network to get a new gig, and she has this contract position. Is it again with a company that you worked with before, or just the people who connected you were people that you had worked with before?
The people that connected me. Yeah. So I'm new to the organization.
Right. Yeah. Great. And how long has it been since you started? Have you started already?
No, I have a little bit of time. I'm going to start in January. So
Perfect.
It's kind of nice to have a little bit of time.
That's great.
That's
great. And then I think for a lot of people, there is a tremendous amount of trepidation about January, particularly if you're in between jobs or kind of shaky in your career. So the fact that you are going through the holidays now, knowing that January you're hitting the ground running in the new gig, that's fantastic. What a gift. So
yeah,
bravo.
It is for sure.
Wonderful. Okay, so Doc, you wanted to say something. You had a point.
I was first congratulating Nancy for her contract position. Welcome to the fractional employment people. I'm a contract employee as well. I do fractional work. I've been doing for quite a while. I enjoy it. And you're right. It's all about network, and find anybody that you worked in the past that can sponsor or encourage you or talk you up with your network and their network.
Excellent. Yeah, so again, I said this, I think, before the recording, but I'll say it again for Nancy and for all of us. Getting the job is the beginning of starting to search for the next one. So you've got 12 months on this contract, and continue to use your network, really refine your value proposition. You were talking about LinkedIn before. Now you have this great opportunity to use LinkedIn as a kind of a marketing hub and a megaphone to share the value that you are contributing. Obviously, you want to be circumspect about not sharing company secrets or anything like that, but to really use your thought leadership to share insights, professional value, get people noticing you and having a kind of a backlog and a presence that will come in handy down the road when you are engaging with other people and looking at other opportunities that, again, you will get through your network. So someone else I know had a hand raised before. Is that still?
John, I did, and
yes.
my only comment was, Nancy, I'm sure you've done this, but this new gig, congratulations on it. Great thing to make certain that you circle back with your network and tell them the good news, and that keeps that group, kind of engaged with you, because as John so well laid out, you're going to call upon them again in the future, but you want them to feel good in terms of their help that they had. And my networking class that I teach, I always tell people that you have to be effective in networking, you have to give before you can get. And so that's that thought leadership that John was talking about, giving out information on LinkedIn, either broadly or more targeted. And you've got a great year to do that.
Yeah. So to that point, and just to plug the blog for a sec, there's a new post on the blog this past week. And I think the title is The Secret to Successful Career Networking: Give First, Receive Last. So there's a whole set of protocols about this idea of you want to always be giving to your network, and some ideas about how to make that work for you. So just for you, Nancy, and anyone else who's interested in learning more about this giving approach to networking. It's up there. So before we go into talking about finances and resilience in uncertain times, anyone else have something they'd like to share or a question they'd like to ask about any topic? It doesn't have to be about the topic du jour. Great. Okay. So Justin Smith and I met, I would say, maybe 3 years ago? Just
Sounds about right.
kind of, yeah, something like that. It's kind of random networking back and forth on LinkedIn. We're kind of on different sides of a same coin here related to career planning, future financial planning, resilience, navigating the future. And when Carrie Hannon and I were doing our Second Act Show podcast, we invited Justin on, and I would encourage you to check that out on the YouTube channel for Second Act Show. We had a great episode where he talked about this idea of the victory lap retirement, the idea that retirement, and we talked about something about retirement a few moments ago before the call started, about the differences in retirement. Oh, Bob, we were talking about your coach, retirement coach episode with your colleague. So anyway, long story short, Justin has done a lot of work on this period of career and the strategies that we need to use to think about and make plans for a successful, eventual, in my book, retirement, and the phases that go towards that. So I'm going to hand it off to him for an opening statement about maybe a little bit more about your background, how you got into this, and why you decided to pivot into this specific area of specialization.
Perfect. Yeah, appreciate it, John. And thanks everyone for coming out. I'm excited to talk today, and I'll give you just a brief background on me. I've been in the industry for about 20 years in the wealth management industry, and it's generally focused, as you may or may not know, on retirement planning, the traditional work till some arbitrary date, generally in your 60s, and then full stop, and then live off of your savings and pension and Social Security. I have observed over the years that model was becoming more and more outdated, and especially during COVID, really turbocharged this movement of semi-retirement or partial retirement, or just kind of breaking the walls on that traditional mold. And that really excited me, seeing people kind of doing what gave them energy and purpose and fulfillment, while also potentially enhancing their financial lives at the same time. So I've been really leaning into that. I happen to be also very focused on tax planning. I think there's a tremendous amount of value that an advisor can deliver on tax planning. And tax planning is incredibly important if you are jumping off of that traditional career treadmill and doing things like Nancy just mentioned. You're doing contract work, or you maybe have some time off, and it's these different phases. The planning becomes ever more critical. So I'm excited here to just talk about any questions you might have on this. I know John and I talked up front about there's some things happening in the political landscape that may or may not impact you as well. I have a lot of resources on this as well. So at some point here, I'll drop my LinkedIn profile into the chat. I've got the kind of singular piece that I have that would be most applicable to this audience is called the Career Crossroads Workbook. So that is a piece I put together that just kind of distills my entire planning approach into a easy to pick up hour-long exercise where you can think about, hey, how should I strategically approach my finances at this stage in life? So we'll talk about all that and anything else that might be on your mind.
Great. So let's jump into the politics first, because obviously it's brand new. It's on everyone's mind. What does this mean for us, 2025 and going forward? And what can we expect to see? What's the breadth and depth of the lane that we're looking at in terms of help in saving, help in planning for retirement, the future of Social Security and Medicare, some of these kind of safety net questions.
Okay.
Where do you see this going?
Yeah, so I think it's all on kind of a spectrum and everything is still speculation. We haven't even gone through the transition yet.
Right.
But
exactly.
I'll start kind of with the most concrete things that we know. So right now we know that the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, which was enacted in Trump's first term in 2017, is set to expire at the end of 2025. So barring an act of Congress, the current tax structure that we have right now is set to expire and revert back to what we had in 2016. Generally speaking, that means slightly higher rates that are compressed, meaning you get to the higher rates faster. It's also going to change certain deductions. If you remember your taxes in 2016, it's slightly more complicated, more moving parts back then. But generally speaking, it would be seen as an overall tax increase across most cohorts starting in 2026. Now that Trump's been reelected and there's a Republican majority in the Senate and presumably the House as well, extending that legislation seems to be near the top of the priority list. That is kind of his legacy, that he has the opportunity to renew or extend. But it's not a slam dunk done deal either. You'd need a 60-vote majority in the Senate to just ram something through. I'm not a congressional strategist kind of guy, but from what I've read is that it will have to go through the reconciliation process, meaning they can't just pass tax cuts that might add trillions to the deficit without having a counterbalancing revenue raise. That's why this is a 10-year tax cut in the first place, is they had to go through that reconciliation process and they had to cap it at 10 years. They initially wanted to make this a permanent tax change. They couldn't make the math work in 2016. So there's also thought that the math is not going to work this time to make it a permanent extension either. So I think the only thing that I'm really comfortable banking on is there's going to be change, right? We're either going to have the expiration at the end of 2025, or we're going to have some new extension. With that extension, there will probably be some horse trading and wrangling to get it done. So I doubt it's just a copycat exact extension. So in the next 15 months or so, anticipate a lot of talk and a lot of change on that income tax front. On Social Security and Medicare, there have not been any real specific proposals on that, but obviously as people are getting closer and closer to retirement, those are more and more critical. Social Security, the trust fund is still, set to expire within the next 10 years or so, which is concerning for a lot of folks. At some point in time, Washington's going to need to come up with a fix for that. Here's the good news. Good news is it's relatively simple math to fix Social Security. The bad news is it's politically very difficult. So my inclination would be that it will be one of those political things that are going to wait till the last minute and then they'll come up with a solution. But the solution's going to be about spreading the pain equally, or balancing out across different constituencies, because correcting the system is going to involve some combination of benefit reductions, age, filing age increases, increased payroll taxes, increased taxation of Social Security benefits. So all of those things are on the table and we're watching for. And one of the Trump campaign promises was eliminating taxes on Social Security. But from my vantage point, I don't know that that has a lot of legs, because of it would only shorten the runway that Social Security has right now for viability. So something everyone should be watching, but I wouldn't let that terrify you or say, hey, I've got to change my approach to Social Security claiming. I think, like I said, a solution is very doable. It's just no one wants to touch it. It's the political third rail.
Well said. Questions to come up around that for anyone, either in this situation, close to it, past it? What are we thinking about? What are we worried about? Marty, did you have a comment?
No.
Oh, okay.
Sorry.
All right. So let's talk a little bit about resilience, about steps that we can take given all this uncertainty. We have we have kind of less than 10 years until that event, that dire event happens around the Social Security Trust Fund. What are some of the things that we can do? In our earlier discussion, Justin and I talked about this idea of kind of financial hygiene. And what are some of the best practices that you advise your clients on that we can all benefit from here on the call today?
Yeah, so I think at this particular stage in life, there are some specific planning things that I think are always present and always should be paying attention to. So when I'm looking at somebody who might be in a career transition, mid-career or late career transition, there's some things I always want to be thinking about. First is cash flow, right? If we're in a career transition, there's likely to be some disruptions to that biweekly paycheck, right? We could be talking about months or even longer periods of time with disruptions to cash flow. So getting clear on what your basic cash flow needs are and what your budget is becomes really important. You don't need to be one of those people that spreadsheets it out and knows it to the dime every single month, but have a rough idea, understanding, hey, this is how much I need to make it per month or per year is really important. You'd be surprised how many people don't really have a solid grasp on that. Once you get that, you can start, again, building your war chest, that emergency fund, which I think often it's very simple, but it's so critical to, if you, again, anticipate a transition might be coming up on the horizon, if you have time to prepare, start stockpiling and building that emergency fund. You know, maybe you are by default having 3 to 6 months, expand it 6 to 12 months can do a ton to really help you out and just navigate some of the turbulent weather that's natural to arise during these transitions. So cash flow is always where I start for virtually anybody to figure out, you know, what do you need to make your life work on a day-to-day basis? Once we start getting a handle around that, health insurance is another really big piece that can be a tripping point for folks at this stage. Once we get to age 65, you've got Medicare to lean on. Medicare is incredibly cost effective and great coverage. But if you find yourself leaving the employer provided healthcare world, or you're going to a contract role, oftentimes health coverage is going to be on you to figure out. So in the transition period, you might look to do COBRA, which is essentially continuing your old employer coverage for up to 18 months, but you're going to be footing the full bill of that. And that could be sticker shock if your previous employer was paying some or all of that premium. Another thing, and this is the perfect time of year to be thinking about it, is everybody in the US, I think we might have some people outside of the country on the call, but in the US, we have that ACA, the Affordable Care Act, which allows anybody to go to the marketplace and get health insurance coverage. We are in the annual enrollment period for that right now. So even if you, let's say you are on COBRA right now, and you have enough COBRA continuation to take you all through 25, you should still be evaluating. Should I do the COBRA plan? Should I look at an ACA plan? See which coverage is better, which costs are better. And the other thing to think about too is if you anticipate you might have lower income in the future, that Affordable Care Act has subsidies available for your premiums, which are income-based. So if you're anticipating a drop in income for a period of time, you might be able to get a relatively generous subsidy on your health insurance. And it's something you should be thinking about so that, again, you can secure your foundation and minimize the cash flow drag from health insurance as well.
Justin, is that different state to state, or is that part of
It is.
Yeah.
Yeah. So certain states have their own marketplace. Certain states have go on to the federal marketplace, but every state's slightly different. Your plans and premiums are going to be geographically dictated, depending on what county or what zip code you're in. You're going to have, you might have 3 options, you might have 10 options, or anywhere in between. So it is very location specific as to what ACA policies you can get. and the cost on that too.
Let's talk a little bit about this kind of risk zone. Late 50s into 60s, approaching retirement age, and the question of when to file. And a lot of opinions on this. I see all the time filing at 62, filing at full retirement age, which depending on your birth year is maybe now around 67 for most people who are kind of coming up on it, or filing at age 70, which is the max, where the benefits max out if you file at 70. So clearly for people who are in some kind of career conundrum, transition, uncertainty in their late 50s, they may want to be tempted to file at 62 and at least have that Social Security buffer, even if it's not a full complement of benefits. What are your thoughts about that? How do you advise clients on that?
Yeah, and then all of this really comes back to having a cohesive plan that's bringing all these elements together, because you'll notice that they're all interconnected. Your cash flow, your insurance, your benefits, your taxes, your investments and savings, they're all intertwined. So this is one of those things where you shouldn't be making the Social Security claiming decision in a vacuum. It really should be part of your bigger picture plan. Now, sometimes you're laid off at 62, you were planning to work through your late 60s, and there's just nothing else you can do, right? So if it's just the last resort safety net, you have to do it, you have to do it. But if you have other resources available, it's really important to kind of scenario play out the different strategies, because once you claim Social Security early, you are locking in lower benefits for life. And generally speaking, if you live past 80 or so, you would have been better off deferring. Another reason why this is really important is the claiming decision might not only impact your benefits, but if you're married, it could impact your spouse's benefits and your spouse's potential survivor benefits as well. So again, it's not a decision to make in a vacuum. You want to make sure that for all the different potential scenarios in your household, what's the best claiming strategy? And what I see often is people, again, maybe that unexpected career transition in your early 60s, and people say, hey, I didn't want to tap into my nest egg yet, so I'm going to tap into Social Security instead. Social Security is essentially part of your nest egg too. Let's be strategic with which is the right one. Another thing we got to be thinking about with Social Security is if you claim before full retirement age, which like you said is between 66 and 67, depending on when you were born. If you start claiming before that full retirement age, and then you have some earnings, there's going to be something called the earnings test that claws back your benefits. So this is another thing where you can't, if you say, hey, I'm going to drop down my income and now I'm just going to be doing, half of what I used to earn as contract or part-time work, and I want to have Social Security kind of make up the gap, it might not work because of that earnings test. Basically, Uncle Sam doesn't want you claiming benefits if you could otherwise be working. So the earnings test basically phases out the Social Security benefits you can receive once earnings start to surpass about $22,000 a year. So it's a relatively low bar that kicks in at. Now, the good news is that you don't lose those dollars forever when they claw it back. Basically, they just credit your future benefits up a little bit higher. But something that frustrates people is that they thought they maybe could supplement with Social Security, and it ends up getting pulled right back. So again, it goes back to having that cohesive plan for Social Security.
Anyone on the call facing some of those situations have any detailed questions they want to ask about this?
Could I just ask, when you say claw back, I'm assuming that means they take it back, but how do they do that? I'm just curious. Let's say I decide to do Social Security, in the next year or something. I'm only 63.
Yeah.
So then I find out I made more than, I've got a job and I didn't realize it was making a little more than I thought. So it's over the $22,000 ceiling.
Yeah. So what they would do is once their records catch up, which takes a little while because the IRS and Social Security do not have the most advanced data. But what they do is they essentially hit the pause button on future benefits. And they say, hey, in 2024, you went this much over the cap. So I'm just throwing out a random number. You were overpaid by $5,000 in 2024. They would essentially stop checks for the first $5,000 in 2025. And then, so if you were getting $2,500 a month, they would pause the January check, pause the February check, and then checks would start back up again in March. And then there'd be this kind of constant readjusting that would happen. So, to reiterate and answer the question, they essentially claw it back by pausing future payments.
And then, Justin, what happens when you hit full retirement age? Does that now go away and you kind of get back into the system, or because you filed early, you're stuck at that rate forever? And will they continue to claw back, or what happens?
No, so the clawbacks essentially stop at full retirement age, because again, that earnings test goes away. And just to make it extra complicated, there's a special earnings test in the year you turn full retirement age. So let's say you turn 68. So people that are turning full retirement this year, it's 68 and 10 months. So let's say somebody turns 68 and 10 months tomorrow. In that year, they have a higher earnings test in that partial year where they're turning. So it gets really complicated, really wonky. But what happens is after you hit full retirement age, eventually those clawbacks are going to stop. And every month that got clawed back kind of goes back and gets recalculated to your go forward benefit, because you were claiming early. Every month that you claim early, Social Security is essentially applying an early claiming penalty. And then each month it gets clawed back, kind of effectively erases that month's early claiming penalty. Am I explaining that okay? It's wildly complicated. But
Justin, when you get essentially reimbursed on that, is it on a month-to-month basis, or are they going to amortize it over a longer period?
No, it just, your base benefit at full retirement age gets clocked a little higher. So let's say
on a month-to-month proportional basis. In other words, let's say there's been 15 months where you got clawed back. When you hit full retirement age, will there be 15 months where there's that benefit brought back in to bring you back up?
No, it gets calculated. The adjustment gets made on your monthly base. So you effectively get those 15 months paid back over your entire lifetime.
Yeah, that was where I was kind of going, because that is a problem, right?
Yeah.
If you calculate it that way, because how long are you gonna be living, right? So if they're gonna go by actuarial tables and they're amortizing it over another 25 years, well, that's kind of not fair.
Yeah. So generally speaking, if you're going to be in that, there's unavoidable situations, there's surprises, things like that. But as a longer term strategy, as a multi-year strategy, you don't want to be in that earnings test. It just doesn't work out well for you.
So what you're saying basically is the deck is really stacked against you if you try to mess with this before full retirement age, and you want to avoid A, filing early, B, risking this clawback. So better to kind of borrow money and eventually pay it back than to do this within the Social Security system.
Yeah, you just want to there's probably other avenues you can look at. Sometimes Social Security might be the only option, but if it's not, you should really take a hard look at the other options that you have available. Whether it be leaning on some savings, which again, a lot of times, naturally people are really averse to that idea of tapping into the nest egg a little bit earlier than they had planned. But if you think big picture, sometimes it's a relatively small fraction. Let's say for 5 years, you need a little bit extra support from the nest egg. But if you know that, hey, I'm going to end up working an extra 5 years part-time longer than I planned, it all kind of balances itself out. Sometimes even, if you essentially make the trade-off of, hey, I'm going to settle into a new lower earning equilibrium, but I'm going to do it for longer, you can potentially end up in a better financial position over the long haul, even if you might be cracking into your nest egg earlier. Now, these are all really complicated things you have to model out to make sure that it works, but that's what the Excel nerds like me are out there for, to help you with that stuff.
Bob had a question.
Yeah.
And can you hear me? I had to change microphones. Got it? Okay. Justin, thank you. That is a very complicated, and I have kind of a two-part question. The first one is that that $22,000 threshold, if you are not at full retirement, I think it's higher if you are at full retirement. Is there an impact in terms of what Social Security pays out at that higher amount? That's the first question. And then the second question is, this is your crystal ball a little bit. Any thoughts in terms of changes on RMDs? Is Trump looking at that at all? Are you hearing anything on it?
Okay. Yeah. So let's tackle those two different pieces. So I want to make sure I got the question right, and I'm answering what you were actually asking. But I think you're alluding to the fact that in the year that you turn full retirement age, there is a higher limit. That's correct.
But let's say you're in the second year of that. Let's not even quibble with. So okay. Let's say you're 70.
If you're 70, the earnings test disappears at your full retirement age.
Okay.
So after 67,
so I can earn $100,000.
Yes.
And not have an impact.
Correct.
I thought someplace I saw that there was like a $60,000 threshold.
Well, what you may be talking about there is the tax on your Social Security benefits on 85% of your Social Security benefit. Right, Justin, you want to get into that?
No, yeah. So let's muddy the waters even more. So there's when you are claiming Social Security, anywhere between 0% and 85% of those benefits are taxable. There's another phase out range. As other income increases, more and more Social Security becomes taxable. So that's one thing that might be in the mix here. You might have also been referencing the Social Security wage base, which is again $130-some thousand. I'd have to check my little cheat sheet here. And they just raised it again, of course, for 2025. So I have to rememorize all the numbers.
So explain that. Explain what that is. That's basically the amount of money that you have to earn in order to kind of get dinged by Social Security.
Yeah. So there's that wage base where they assess 6.2% of your wages up until the wage base limit, which is, I think it's in the 130s, or is it the 160s? Give me a second here. I'll give you the right number. Anyway, it's in that neighborhood. We'll move on. And then one thing to be cognizant of is if you are going from the W-2 world into the 1099 world, like Nancy is going 1099, you get the pleasure of paying both sides of Social Security. So oftentimes people don't realize that until they become self-employed, is that the employee and the employer both pay Social Security and Medicare tax. So 6.2% for Social Security up until the cap, and then 1.45% for Medicare. When you're self-employed, again, you get to pay both sides of it. So it ends up being
even after you're retired, right?
Yes, it doesn't.
As long as you're earning money, you're paying.
Yeah, you can be 100 years old. If you are earning, you are paying into Social Security, even if the check's coming right back to you. So that ends up being a big surprise, something you have to factor in when you are doing that W-2 to 1099 pivot. Okay, Bob, you also asked about RMDs. So we'll quickly address that.
Let's talk about what RMDs are for those of us who are not familiar with that.
Probably just about everybody on this call has some sort of retirement account, 401k, IRA, 403b, something like that. Those are tax-deferred retirement accounts. And Uncle Sam lets you put money in pre-tax, let it grow over time, but eventually Uncle Sam wants to get paid back. So when you take money out, he's going to tax it. And even if you don't need it, Uncle Sam is going to say, you got to start taking money out of the account. I'm getting impatient. I need to get paid. So that is what's called the required minimum distribution. A couple of years ago, it started at age 70 and a half, where you'd have to take a certain percentage, roughly 4% of your IRA balances, take that out every year. During COVID, there was one piece of legislation that bumped it out, and then there's a second piece that bumped it out again. So right now, if you haven't started already into those required minimum distributions, you're going to have to generally start at either 73 if you were born in the 50s, or 75 if you were born 1960 and after. So we have seen that RMD age bump out a couple times, which was welcomed by some, but I caution people that this is kind of an insidious tax increase. When Congress pushed this through, they didn't do it because it was going to expand the budget deficit. They did it because it was actually a revenue raiser. The way it works is that a lot of times folks are contributing to those 401ks and IRAs when they might be in lower tax rates, or modest tax rates, and it grows and grows and grows over time. And then it keeps growing. They might not touch it for a long, long, long time. It grows a ton. And then at 75, you start taking it out, and you might be in the highest tax bracket of your life when you start taking it out. So
because you're still working and you're generating a lot of income.
Because you might still be working. And again, if your nest egg's done really well, if you've done a great job saving, those required distributions could be bigger than your income was while you were still working too.
Right. In other words, the 4% becomes a lot of cash, and then you're taxed at whatever that rate is you're at. So, and this is, you're taxed as dividend income, straight income?
Ordinary income. Yep.
Ordinary income.
Yep. So
and Justin, I'm sorry. So the 4%, let's say that just do the math simple, and let's say that you have $100,000 in a 401k or something of that nature. Is the 4% that $4,000? You have to get that paid out to you each month?
Each year.
Each year.
That's the annual amount. And I'm saying 4% for simplicity.
Yeah,
of course,
the
IRS likes to complicate it. There's actually a whole table that they use to figure it out. But
comes that. And then you said, to John's question, that is taxed as ordinary income.
Correct.
Got it.
So like I said, what can happen is that if you were a diligent saver and saved for a really long time, and then you worked all the way up till say 70 or so, all of a sudden at 70, Social Security kicks in at the max, and then you have these required distributions. It's not uncommon to come across people who make more money or have more taxable income retired than they did when they were working. I see this a lot with, if you can imagine that kind of frugal teacher next door, they live a very modest lifestyle, but they save really well. That's where I see this kind of fact pattern pop up. The way we get around that is by doing, proactive, forward-looking tax planning, right? We should be thinking about not just this year's taxes and next year's taxes, but the next decade, the next 2 decades, so we can forecast it out. At its simplest, tax planning is about figuring out where are the high years, where are the low years, and seeing if we can level it out, right? Like I talked about, some people get it backwards. They put money into the pre-tax IRAs when they're low, and they take it out when it's high. That's getting it completely wrong. Uncle Sam's winning that game. You want to, if you're high now and low later, that's a great time to do a pre-tax IRA. But again, if you might be low or modest and you want to put some money away, put it in a Roth IRA, because maybe you're higher later. And when you take money out of that Roth IRA, it's going to be tax-free. So there's a lot of strategy involved with those retirement accounts, deciding when, what type of account to fund, how much, when to start draining and pulling from those accounts as well.
So I want to just jump in here. We've got about 10, 15 minutes left on the call. I wanted to ask you to run us through some of those best practices, top level strategies, top level considerations that you would recommend that we make to think long term. If we are somewhere, let's say, looking on the call, 50s into early 60s, maybe maybe perhaps most people on the call are full retirement age. What should we be thinking and bearing in mind as we're looking at our accounts, such as they are, whatever they are, and thinking, okay, well, how can I improve here, improve there, wedge it up a little bit? What are some of these mindsets that we should be working on?
Okay. Yeah. So I'll kind of break down, kind of go through quickly the planning framework. And we don't have to take detailed notes because, again, this is in that Career Crossroads workbook. So I think what is critically important, some people miss this step, is first start with, what are my goals and vision for the future? Do I want to be working in maybe a different role or doing entrepreneurial things, whatever it might be? Get really clear on what you want the next 5, 10, 20 years to look like, right? And then we kind of know where you're going, then we can design the best plan for you. Because you don't want to necessarily follow the rules of thumb or the defaults that are designed for somebody who retires exactly at 65, never works again, claims, you are probably not doing the cookie cutter retirement. So don't follow the cookie cutter advice. Get clear on your own vision and goals for the future and start there. Once you know that, I think there's 5 key things you need to focus on. One we talked about is cash flow. Understand what your cash needs are, what you need to make your life work every day, and then start plotting out over time, how are we going to satisfy those cash needs? In the immediate future, it's probably going to be work. There might be a transitory period where maybe it's a combination of different buckets. Over the long haul, it's going to be a retirement nest egg and Social Security and things like that. Figure out where the cash is going to come from over years. You can do that kind of rough math. Generally speaking, if you want to get more detailed, you want to work with a professional who can do a detailed forecast on that. The second thing I alluded to before is health insurance. Figure out, same timeline, what is my health insurance strategy going to be? Because you might go from employer provided coverage to COBRA to ACA to Medicare. Again, go through that whole timeline and figure out, where am I going to be getting health insurance? How am I going to be jumping from plan to plan to make that as efficient as possible? Generally speaking, if you can time it out right, you want to be making those switches at year end as opposed to mid-year. If you switch health insurance mid-year, you're going to reset your deductible and you could end up spending a lot more than you would otherwise have to. So that's even though COBRA gives you 18 months, let's say you started COBRA in January, so you had the full year, and then that next year, COBRA is only going to get you through halfway. You might want to accelerate the shift to an ACA plan so that you don't have that mid-year switch and get into the position where you might have to pay the full deductible in the first half of the year on one plan and pay a whole nother deductible the second half. So that's what I want to be thinking about. And then obviously the light at the end of the tunnel there on health insurance is Medicare at age 65, where things get a little bit more simple, more affordable for sure on the health insurance side. The next bucket I would talk about is getting clear about kind of all your employee benefits. If you might be leaving work, you might have pensions or bonuses or equity compensation that you want to be thinking about. Hey, what's the best way to work this? You might
HSAs.
have HSAs, 401ks. Get clear on all that. Have a good inventory of all those things. And then if you're moving into self-employed mode or entrepreneurial mode, a lot of those things are going to be on you. You're going to have to figure out your benefits, right? I just went through open enrollment, but if I was self-employed, I'd have to figure out my health insurance, my HSA, 401k, all that. There is a thing called a solo 401k that works really well. So if you have pulled off this career transition, you're 1099 worker and you have excess cash flow and you can still save, you can still do retirement account funding, whether it's with a traditional IRA, SEP IRA, solo 401k. There's a lot of options, just depending on your individual circumstance.
Justin, does the solo 401k allow you to make a higher level of contribution than
Yes.
traditional IRA?
Yeah, so it's kind of 3 different sizes. Traditional IRA is going to be 8,000 cap. SEP IRA, you can get a lot in there, but it's limited to roughly 25% of your net income. The solo 401k lets you get the absolute most in there, where you can get nearly 70,000 at the most.
And is there a downside to the solo 401k?
It can be slightly more complex.
Is it more expensive to set up?
Generally, no. I mean, you could walk into Charles Schwab or Fidelity and set up any one of those 3 accounts in a couple minutes. It's really just about what the best fit is for you. Then the 4th thing we want to be thinking about is taxes, right? Like I talked about, at its highest level, start mapping out what are these tax years going to look like. Is this going to be a low income year, high income, or anything in between? You're not going to have perfect clarity on this, but the point is, let's say you knew that in 2025, you had just taken a early retirement package from your previous employer. The paycheck was going to stop on January 1st, and you were going to take some time off. So January 2025, you're starting with no income, and you're going to live off savings for a while in 2025. That could be the lowest income tax year of the rest of your life. You don't want to squander that. You want to potentially take that opportunity and accelerate income. Do things strategically, because again, you might never see those low tax brackets again in your lifetime. It can be a great opportunity to shift things around on your balance sheet. We do that with either taking distributions from your retirement accounts or converting retirement accounts from pre-tax to Roth, essentially bringing future income forward to today into a lower tax year so that you don't have to pay higher taxes later. So mapping out and modeling that tax situation is really important, as well as, again, cautioning if you are going to the 1099 world, be going in eyes wide open to what you're going to be owing for self-employment taxes. And again, if you're collecting invoices, no one's withholding the taxes for you like it is in the W-2 world. It's on you to make sure you're adequately setting aside those tax dollars throughout the year, paying them in. So that's where I can see people get really burned, is that they go from W-2 world to 1099 world, and they don't adjust their approach when it comes to taxes. And then the last one is kind of investments and savings. This is, again, where things get a little tricky, but if you do start to build out a longer term forecast and model for the next 5 or 10 years, reevaluate, do I need to keep saving? How important is saving? A lot of times what we see is people have done really well for decades in saving, and they might get to this mid or late career transition, and they feel terrible that they're not putting any dollars into the 401k anymore. But a lot of times it's okay, right? If you can just let that thing grow for another 5 or 10 years while you're covering, again, the basic cash flow needs, that's more than enough. So don't beat yourself up if you take a couple years off from contributing to the 401k, especially if you've done a lot of the legwork already. Hopefully by this point, you've accumulated a nice base, and just by virtue of time and letting it compound for a couple more years, that's going to be more impactful than 1 or 2 final contributions in. But you again want to validate that out and figure out what combination of savings or work am I going to need to make this plan work. So that's kind of how I approach it. Again, that thought process is all modeled out in the Career Crossroads workbook, which you can grab on my LinkedIn profile. I designed it to, again, be an hour or 2 exercise that you can work through on a Saturday to get started getting some ideas out of your head and on the paper. It's probably not going to be the definitive plan that the stars are going to align after you fill that out, but it gives you a nice starting point to know, hey, here are the pain points I need to start addressing. And again, professionals like me are always out there that are available to help with this process after you start to wrap your hands around it.
Justin, just another kind of a logistical or resource question. Are there any, in addition to the workbook and doing that kind of contemplative planning process, are there any calculators, spreadsheets that we should have handy that we can kind of plug numbers into that will help us in terms of modeling some of these future financial decisions, including taxes, savings, RMD calculation, all this kind of stuff? Is there kind of a group of spreadsheets for those of us who are kind of a little bit wonkier? We should be aware of.
Yeah, there are resources like that all over the internet. I know firsthand that Fidelity has a lot of great ones that are free, simple to use. They're not going to try to make you download some weird file or put you on an obscure mailing list either. So there's kind of a little level of trust and validity in their tools. So I happen to like their tools that they have online. Vanguard also has some great resources as well for those kind of basic calculators and things like that.
And what are those calculators? What should we be fiddling with? What should we be using to kind of give us a little bit of peace of mind about this and sense of agency around our financial management?
So Fidelity has a pretty robust retirement calculator. That's a great place to start. That's kind of the core where you can say, I'm this years old. I need to spend this much money per month. Here's what I have saved. Here's my Social Security. I'm going to earn this for the next X number of years. I'm going to save that for the next number of years. It'll test it out and tell you if it works or not. That's really a great starting point to get started. And then if you still feel like you want to get more granular, more detailed, or if there's more complexity, it's a great time to tap in for a professional.
Got it. Cool. Any other final questions before we break here?
So Justin, are you with Fidelity?
I don't work for Fidelity. No, I'm with Savant Wealth Management. We're an independent registered investment advisor. We do custody client accounts there. So some of our clients have accounts at Charles Schwab. Some have them at Fidelity. I have no vested interest with Fidelity. My personal accounts happen to be there. Some of my clients are.
They're pretty good. I was just curious.
Yeah.
Because I knew you were somewhere with wealth management. I just was.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So there was a question here in the chat about online calculators give you a percentage of success. What does that mean? That's a fantastic question. So a lot of these calculators run what's called a Monte Carlo simulation. What that means is that the big variable here is what happens with returns in the markets, right? Because even if a portfolio has historically returned 6%, it's generally variable over time. And that variability has a great impact on does the plan work or does it not. So these Monte Carlo simulations run against thousands of different randomized trials to see if the markets go like this or like that over time, how does this work? And it might say you have an 87% probability of success. What that means is it ran 1,000 trials and 870 of them worked and 130 of them did not work. So that tells me generally that, hey, this is on the right track. And what that 13% tells me as well is it's not a 13% chance that you're going to live in a van down by the river eating cat food. It's a 13% chance that you might have to make some adjustments over time if markets don't go the way we want. If we have a 2008 tomorrow that happens, yes, we might have to make some adjustments. But generally speaking, if you see a number in the 80s or above, you're on the right track. And the thing with these calculators, all those numbers, all those assumptions are going to change tomorrow. So it's not a one and done process. This is kind of an ongoing iterative process.
So you want to kind of keep checking in.
Yep. And then the follow-up there was what numbers you should be aiming for, regardless of if you're retired now or won't be for 10 years. I think generally over 80% is good. I will caution you too, if it says 99%, it might make you feel good for a second, but that means you should probably revisit the plan. Either you're saving too much, you're not spending enough, go back to your vision and goals and your lifestyle and say, hey, am I doing everything I want to be doing? Because I'm, saving more than I might need. That's actually, in my world, that is a conversation I have a lot, more than you suspect, of people saying, I didn't realize this. It's just their nature to be conservative and frugal.
Right.
And they get to the end of the line and say, oh, I saved more than I needed to. I can either change work or change spending.
So strangely enough, too much security may not be a good thing.
Hey, we're about trying to find the sweet spot.
Right. Hey, Marty, you've got a question.
I just wanted to ask if we could contact you and ask questions or.
Yeah, absolutely. So the best way, if you want to just reach out on LinkedIn, you can do that. And then I'll throw this in the chat as well. Give me 1 second. Yeah. I'll put a consultation link so we can just cut out and go straight to booking a call on my calendar if you'd like. I'll put that in the.
And John, if anyone has saved too much and not spending enough,
please feel free to direct it towards me.
You have
I
a-
want
you have a
to be
fund.
helpful. I want
You
to be
have a-
helpful. I want to be
The
helpful.
Bob Gerst Survival Fund,
Yeah,
absolutely.
exactly.
All right, and
So
Marty,
do you take, and, you know, if it makes sense, do you take on new clients?
yes. So, but I just sent that link out. That's for anybody on this call, friends of John or friends of mine. I want to offer, you know, some one-on-one time to talk through your personal situation. And my only aim for that call is to make it as valuable as possible, give you some clarity. If you want to talk about potentially what working together looks like, if there could be a fit there, I'm happy to have that conversation, but by no means is it an obligation.
Great, thanks.
All right, guys, wonderful conversation. Thank you so much, Justin. This has been extraordinarily valuable. Appreciate your time.
It's fun. We shouldn't
today.
go 2 years in between conversations.
That's right.
Next time.
That's right. Well, we'll do this again next year. I think end of the year is obviously the best time to do this, as we're all kind of thinking about what's going to happen. And next year we'll get a chance to know by this time whether or not the Trump tax cuts are going to.
We'll see about that.
And in
I'm
what
not going to hold
form.
my breath.
Right.
If we'll get that
exactly.
kind of certainty.
Yeah, I mean, when he started this, we didn't have that extra $15 billion in deficit.
Very true.
Or is it trillion? Okay, guys, thank you very much. We will see you again
Thank you.
in December. And have a great month, everybody. And thanks again, Justin.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Take care.
Justin. Thanks,
a lot.
John.
Bye.
Happy Thanksgiving.